This has been an amazing and beautiful occasion. I want to thank the Interfaith Moral Action on Climate for having this wonderful and vigorous discussion. I want to thank, I don't know where she went to, Sister Jackie Patterson. She's right, she's right there. I can't see she's over there she's usually on my left, she's on the right, or your left, which is where she should be. I want to thank everybody here, the beautiful, my brother Iman and the rabbis and all those of clergy who have gathered here today. I start off by saying water is life. Many would Shoni. Water is life. I start off also in the spirit of this house on the 88th birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King. It's a wonderful place to be in a place where Dr. King spoke. It's an amazing to be standing where he stood and to have a discussion about justice and equality 50 years later. So I first want to thank this house here at the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church for continuing their legacy of justice and allowing for this to be a house where we can gather and talk about where we go as a people. I remember the story of the late, great Bob Edgar, who told the story of when he was a young man. He told the story that when Dr. King came into this house, that it was filled to the rafters, and he found his way in to this edifice. And during that time, the discussion of the day was around the issue of Vietnam. And he was getting ready to speak with the clergy and laity concerned about Vietnam. He had just given his Beyond Vietnam speech, How to Break the Silence. That's important for us today for a number of things, because at the time when he gave that speech, Beyond Vietnam, how we must break the silence, many of those in the African American community, Jackie, were wondering why he was moving the discussion from the inner cities, the discussion of racism to militarism. They were wondering at that time that you were going off track. I know, Jackie, and I know many of you today who are in the environmental justice movement are sometimes told that you're off track in your discussion of climate change. That's a white person's issue. It's a Birkenstock issue. It's a Vermont or California issue. Why are you talking about climate change and how many parts per million carbon are in the atmosphere when we are dealing with hell today? And so I'm comforted to know that when Dr. King gave his speech, that he was in the same crossroads. He was in the same path when there were those who were saying that militarism does not deal with racism. But when he came to the bombs that are dropping over there are the same bombs that are dropping in our neighborhoods. Now, I would wonder today, as many of you are probably wondering today on the 88th birthday of Dr. King, you're wondering if he had survived the gun attack in Memphis, Tennessee, on April 4th, 1968. You're probably wondering, would there be a monument around the corner? You're wondering if we would still hold him in reverence if he was here today at 88 years old, somewhere in this country or in another country. We would wonder how he would be treated by the president-elect if it wasn't a holiday that was fought for by Congressman John Conyers and Stevie Wonder and black folk and white folk and brown folk and red folk and straight folk and all kind of folk and gay folk coming together fighting for a holiday that we can be on tomorrow, which is now a day of action. And to those in Biloxi, Mississippi, it isn't Great Americans Day. It is Dr. King holiday. But we would wonder how Donald Trump, the president-elect, would treat Dr. King. Well, we don't have to look too far, because his contemporary, John Lewis, who was a little younger than Dr. King, is still around today. And he has called you illegitimate. He has said you are not worthy of the office of the presidency. He has said you have done everything to call the current president illegitimate, and so such are you. And the president-elect, in response, not saying that, Congressman Lewis, let's talk about this. Congressman Lewis, let's work this out. He said you are all talk. So we know how, if he would treat Congressman Lewis, we know how he would treat Dr. King. And the reason why this is important, because as we are having a discussion today that reflects where we are today, as we are talking about how we deal with climate change. We have a president who in '68, when Dr. King was given the speech of Beyond Vietnam, was graduating from the Wharton School of Business and then getting access of $1 million loan when he finished to become a slum lord in New York. Had no idea what those who were marching in the streets and dying on balconies in Memphis, Tennessee, and coming to churches on New York Avenue in Washington, D.C. to discuss where we were as a people. Have no idea of John Lewis being hit in the head in Selma. Or like Dorothy Height, whose building is paid for on the inauguration march, where you will soon pass. Had no idea of those who laid it down. Much more than all talk, Mr. President-elect. But your talk is very dangerous. And so today I want to just reflect for a few moments on how we have moved from beyond Vietnam to now how we must move to beyond fossil fuels. A time to break the silence. What we saw this past April in North Dakota was amazing. We saw children who went out there and stood first at the camp called Standing Rock by the Sioux and Lakota people. And they gathered there, first children, standing up to what would come down the pike as the pipeline. And then they would be followed by the elders. First, note that the elders came behind the children and didn't move them out the way, but supported them. And the initial campaign was called Respect Our Water with a Z. And they began to organize and mobilize using social media because they realized that the language of the environmental movement was kind of off. It was kind of in the sky, and they began to reflect that water is life. Let's bring this thing home, as we here in Standing Rock are dealing with dirty water as those who are in Flint, Michigan. And so they stood up there, but they stood up on the backs of those in the movement who they said they saw from the Keystone XL pipeline movement. And they saw those who gathered in Washington, D.C. were fought on climate and gathered in the snow and the wind and the cold in 2013, and that inspired them to say that if we could beat that pipeline, then we can be this pipeline too. Which is so important for any movement to recognize that we follow those that come before us, not 50 years ago, but just even months ahead. And in that process, they saw the power of those fighting the Keystone XL pipeline. And they saw those coming together as indigenous communities, as black and white and brown and yellow and small green groups and big green groups coming together, fighting together. And that inspired them to then take to the Standing Rock. And then those, as you know the story you've already heard today, many of them gathered and joined them. But where we are now, Dr. King said so well in his last book, where do we go from here? Community or chaos? And so where we go from here is this, is that as a climate movement, there are a number of things that we must do. The first thing that we must do is that this is not normal. What we're seeing today by those leaving million-dollar jobs and leaving behind billions of dollars to take government jobs, they don't even want to take a paycheck so they can stay empowered to pollute and take us on a path of destruction. That is not normal. So when you see a Scott Pruitt or a Rex Tillerson or even a Donald Trump leaving behind billions of dollars to get into positions of power, we must ask ourselves, why? What has happened for you to leave your suite to come to the streets to fight against us? It is because we are winning. We are beating you all over this planet. They are rising up in India. They are rising up in Africa. They are rising up in South America. They are rising right here in America. The people are rising up. And because your business plan is a death sentence for the next generation, we have no alternative that you must lose. So I close with this, in the spirit of Dr. King, that this is not normal. Second, we can win. Third, we must come together and break down our silos. And fourth, and most important, we must use love. The one thing I will say, it was mentioned that we have to spread and grow our movement. And we must make climate change an everyday, every person discussion. One thing that I have learned, as many of you know, I'm from New Orleans, from Louisiana, and worked in New Orleans, being from Shreveport. One of the things that I have learned when you saw 12 years ago, Hurricane Katrina, there was no discussion of how much carbon was in the atmosphere when people were drowning in the water. There was no discussion of the physics, while physics is real. And I am a person who's, as an academic, someone who's gone to the great schools in this country, recognizes science quite well. But when you are struggling and drowning in the water, that is not the discussion. People want to live. And as a climate movement, we have not done ourselves justice simply by being right. Because right is not enough. We now must love. And now we're at a point in time where we give homage to Dr. King, who fought for equality. But no offense to those who fought for equality, because their fight was outstanding and we saw them coming together. Now today we can celebrate the fact that we have had a black mayor, a black governor, and even a black president. And so we can celebrate many accomplishments. And while there's still much more to go, as we've heard by the powerful voices of Black Lives Matter, we still celebrate that we have moved from that regarding equality. And even here in D.C., D.C. is not equal, as we try to make this a free state here in this country. But one of the things that we must recognize is that we are no longer fighting for equality, but we are now fighting for existence. Because if Dr. King had came to this church to discuss our fight against militarism and racism and all the isms in the world, if they had lost that battle, we would still be here, because you can still have, to some degree, clean air and clean water. But if you lose this battle we face right now against Trump and his cronies and all the oil state that will take over everything, then the next generation that will stand here in this pulpit in 2063, they will not have an opportunity to stand at all, because they won't have clean air or clean water. This is not a game. They will not exist. They have us on the Titanic, but we must stop the ship right now and do everything we can, including putting our bodies against the machine and our lives at risk, if need be, to fight for the next generation. We owe that to the next generation. We owe that to them. And so when Dr. King spoke, and he said that I have a dream, and he said one day we'll be free at last. Free at last. Thank God Almighty, we're free at last. We now stand here 50 plus years later, not only saying that we're fighting to be free at last, but that one day when we stop Exxon and Chevron, or what they call it, Chevron, or BP, or Sunoco, that one day we'll be fossil free at last. Fossil free at last. Thank God Almighty, we will be fossil free at last. All power to the people. All power to the people. Water is life. Water is life. Water is life. Water is life. Many Wachoni. Many Wachoni. Many Wachoni. Water is life. Water is life. Water is life. All power to the people.